separating my passionate sovereignty from other people's expectations. I feel like my biggest learning has been in the space of making sure that I am in service to the purpose, the thing that I can do differently than anybody else, that fingerprint that I can put on the world that's just absolutely unique, more than what, quote, a coach is or what, quote, a consultant is. I'm always going to do it just a little bit differently from the way other people do it, and that's a good thing.
Courtney is a professional coach and corporate strategist who teaches top performers and innovators to release emotional fragility and rise to a level of passionate sovereignty beyond their wildest dreams. She is also the founder of world skincare brand Sloane Marley, drawing on deep tradition and the science of fermentation. In this episode, we talk about how to navigate the pain of figuring out your independent path to purpose and how to take a chance on yourself. You're listening to Going Conscious, the podcast where we discover new ways to live a more conscious life of fulfillment and freedom. Each week, I speak with entrepreneurs, academics, and changemakers who have made big transformations, left unfulfilling lives behind, and found meaning in this new world where purpose drives success. Let's get inspired to live our unique journeys to the fullest. Let's explore the impact we want to make and deepen our understanding of ourselves, each other, and this beautiful world around us. Live your freedom. I'm your host, Nikki Trott. In this episode, we talk about the physical toll of not being aligned with your values in work, how to be instinctive and intuition-led, how to trust the process, how to separate your sovereignty from other people's expectations, emotional fragility, how to let go of identity roles, why we've both stopped reading the news, and what we learned about ourselves from the enneagram. Now let's go to our conversation. Courtney, hello and welcome to Going Conscious.
Hi, Nikki.
I'm very happy to have you here and looking forward to hearing about your journey and your conscious entrepreneurship journey. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, has your work always been driven by purpose, or is that something that you discovered, and what led you to discovering it?
Oh, it's such a good question. I would say intrinsically, yes, it's always been driven by purpose. That's just a huge part of the way I'm wired. I come from a lot of artistic background, and just that creative force, that creator identity has always really made me ground in purpose. That said, my work began in the corporate world. And in that case, I went in thinking I was about purpose and was choosing where I was going to be based on purpose. And it didn't entirely go that way. And so over the course of working in that environment, I had to kind of figure out that the road for me was one of more independence. And I really struck out on my own to be an independent, purpose-driven entrepreneur quite a long time ago. So, but it was pretty painful with going through that growing pain of thinking I was invested in bigger business's purpose and realizing that I wasn't.
Yeah. So what was that like when you thought that you had an aligned purpose with the bigger business or the corporate, and then discovered that that wasn't the case?
Yeah. So I came from a background where my university experience was essentially this degree that was focused on health science, but also on communications and marketing and PR. And when I was in university, I was spending a lot of time working on big causes. I was doing a lot to do with HIV and AIDS education, and a lot about date rape and just education in general, helping people, hopefully, that were feeling a little bit oppressed or not having enough information. And I, from that perspective, got involved in a job where I was a marketing administrator for a pharmaceutical research company. And when I went in, I really thought, oh, wow, this is my opportunity to contribute to history. This is my opportunity to be a part of the way life changes with intervention that really supports these things that can make people's lives really miserable medically. And because of my previous advocacy work, I thought I was on the right track with that. As it turned out, that's not really the way it looked on the inside. It was an extraordinary business experience. I learned so much because from the very beginning, I was reporting to and connected to and working with the C-suite. And so from very, very young, very green age, I understood and saw exactly how a C-suite works and how a high-level business development team selling multi-million-dollar deals works. And I was in service to them. And so from that perspective, I mean, I still reference that work every day. From the other side, from the moral, ethical, values-based side, I realized over time that I wasn't really aligned with that type of business. And some of what is necessary about that kind of business in this sort of information, it was just very stressful to me to feel unaligned and feel as if I was disconnected from the way that that work was working. And so, it really started to take a toll on me physically. So I started to get ill. I started to be very, very, very stressed. And it was all really self-induced by responding to this gap between the work and my values. And over time, it just became very clear that I had to move on. Not that I wanted to, I just had to. So I did make a break from that work and moved into some more advertising agency-based, communication, branding agency-based work. And that was a huge liberation and a huge, huge difference in quality of life. But a major, amazing stepping stone, but very, very difficult at the time.
Yeah, so you really had physical symptoms that you needed to make a big change. And I'm wondering, was there one final moment, like the last straw, something that happened that made you realize that you couldn't carry on?
Yeah. As in any business, there is information that's trickling in that's, of course, very confidential and private. And just the way that the cycle of business was working, it was affecting so many people out there in the world. And yet it was still, behind that corporate veil. And it was just bothering me that there was this disconnect. I still had friends and family that were, taking medications that were about to go off the market and things like that. And it was so complex because I knew things that I couldn't necessarily help support other people with in terms of that information. And so that was really, really, really bothering me. And in addition to that, there was a lot of just sort of putting head down and focusing on what was in front of people with the work in terms of, those that were happy with the job. And I don't necessarily judge that. It just, my value system was screaming. My body was, rebelling. It was showing up in stress in many ways for me all over from a body perspective, a somatic perspective. And when I tried to elevate some of these concerns, the response I got was really one of, well, this is the way it works. And so again, if I look back, I don't necessarily have judgment or fault toward those people based on the circumstance they were in and the positions that they were in different parts of the company. And also, for me, it just became a total deal breaker. I didn't have internal support. I wasn't able to speak to anybody with real honesty and integrity about what was bothering me. There was no ability to impact change. And sort of also amongst all of that, I realized pretty quickly there was a pretty heavy bias that was never going to allow me to grow as rapidly as a business person as I would like to in that environment either. And so I realized that I needed to really remove the ceiling above me from that perspective too. And all that said, it's really hard to do all those things and make that bold move when you're not feeling well and you're feeling depleted and unsupported. So, now when I see other people going through that, I'm just so conscious that that's a really difficult break to make when you're feeling so depleted.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of courage. And what was it then that enabled you to make that break? What gave you the strength you needed?
Yeah, honestly, I just didn't feel like I had a choice. I did feel like I had a choice. I guess it's the reverse of that. I felt like I had no choice but to make the choice to go. I knew my wellness was never going to outlast these conflicts. and that I was, it was getting worse and worse for me related to the way that my body was responding to the stress because I wasn't living in my purpose. And it was not that mental pinging of like, you could do more. It was honestly my entire body, mind, heart, spirit system rebelling and saying, no, this isn't going to work. And so I literally went in one weekend, packed up my desk, packed up the limited things that were mine, left my keys on the desk and left a letter. I mean, it was not ever the way I would like to leave a job, but it was just at a point where there was literally no other choice. And it worked out pretty well in the long run. It was incredibly stressful initially, but ultimately everything went the right way from that point forward. And I know very clearly if I had stayed there, I would not have had, a great number of the opportunities that I have had because I just wouldn't be well. I wouldn't be mentally well.
Yeah, it's really that severe. And so how did you find your path? Because now you're an independent entrepreneur and you have different strings to your bow, which connect together. And I'm wondering how you made the leap then and discovered your purpose and what it is that you wanted to do and put out into the world. How did you get that clarity?
It's an interesting question because it was very bit by bit. It was one step at a time. It was one move at a time. So initially I went from working at a corporate level as running a marketing department and managing our agencies to moving to work for the agency side and represent the agency and the client and kind of bridge that communication between them. And then, over time, these moves that were each independent, so that was really important to me, kept adding to the ability to get to where I am now. So along the road, I think many people that know me were looking at my very portfolio career and thinking, what is she doing? And is this all going to make sense? And these things seem so unrelated. If I look back at all of it now, I can see all the relationships and all the ways that all of it has informed exactly where I've arrived. But my first step was to work for some agencies. My next step was to own a brand agency. And then out of those two things, I started to find very clear roads of understanding how the inner workings of corporate business operate and how individuals within business need support. And so that was the part where I got into consulting and management consulting and executive coaching. And so it has all sort of made sense if I look back now. But at the time, I was literally just going to the next thing that felt as good as it could and to the next thing that felt right and made sense.
Yes, I love how you describe that things seemed unrelated. And then now you can see how very related they were. And that really resonates with my journey as well. And we've definitely got similarities in ours where I was working in brand consulting and brand marketing for agencies and working with loads of big fashion brands around the world, but I wasn't aligned with their values. It took me a while to figure that out. And then I went off and trained as a coach and thought that I had completely made a clear cut. And of course, now, I'm coaching and consulting conscious entrepreneurs, and it's all relevant. All of that business brand experience that I got is very, very important to the work that I offer my clients now. And I really could not see how those two things, how the fashion brand consulting and then the coaching, how they would ever link together. At the time, I just knew that I had to follow my intuition, and then it all becomes clear. So I think that so many people do experience that, where you're feeling called to do something and you can't really see the bigger plan, but you need to, and that you need to really commit to it anyway and let the bigger plan unfold in front of you. And you talked about feeling and how you felt what needed to be next and where you needed to go and what changes you needed to make, and you did what felt right next. So can you tell us more about that, how it was led by feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, I'm very, very instinctive and intuitive. And I think the thing that was making me ill in that first career path was not listening to my intuition. It was my intuition was calling me at that point, and I was rejecting it. I was rejecting it for a linear growth path that looked a certain way and fit a certain expectation, I guess, in terms of how I could progress in business at that time. And once I started listening to that instinct, and the more deeply that I do listen to it, it always results in the right thing. And there is a part of trusting the process for sure. There is a part of, I think we as coaches learn to tell those that we coach to trust the process. But it was a huge part of my journey as well. And, just each step, listening to that little inner voice that got louder and louder over time. And it's very loud now in such a beautiful, good way. And I think that listening and that adherence to that has absolutely made me clear about what I should be doing, but also clear about separating my passionate sovereignty from other people's expectations. I feel like my biggest learning has been in the space of making sure that I am in service to the purpose, the thing that I can do differently than anybody else, that fingerprint that I can put on the world that's just absolutely unique, more than what, quote, a coach is or what, quote, a consultant is. I'm always going to do it just a little bit differently from the way other people do it, and that's a good thing. And those experiences have absolutely informed such depth because I can relate to people in corporate business and their stress. I can relate to people in smaller business like agencies and their stress and what they deal with. I can relate to entrepreneurs and that journey of becoming and trying to unfold and financing and all the things that go along with that. So I feel like the breadth of me listening to that one clear inner voice is very, very wide. And it gives me a really wide berth to be able to make a profound difference. I mean, I trust that if I listen to that, I will absolutely continue to make a difference. And that's very, very important to me.
That's so beautiful the way you describe that. And I completely agree with you. And there's this sense of the body or the intuition and then the mind, and that they sometimes try to lead us down different directions, and people's expectations. Absolutely. One of the big things that we all, I think, need to go through a process to shed and let go of and stop caring about, to be able to truly follow our own path, which will never fit into someone else's perfect idea of us or the world. And you described how you really discovered that you do things differently. You do them your way, you do them your unique way, and that's a good thing. And that's something that you need to channel and grow and listen to more and more, rather than trying to fit into the boxes that maybe you perceive other people to have created, which is obviously also just our own perception of those expectations as well. So they're even more warped. And how did you find that you were able to create that strength within yourself to be able to follow your own path and let go of the external expectations?
Yeah, I mean, bit by bit again. But I think one big thing, and it's interesting, I would say maybe the resonance of what it was is just now coming to clarity for me in the last year or so. But it's been there all the time. It's just maybe now it has a bit of a name. I think I was really suffering from, kind of an emotional fragility that made me feel lonely and indecisive and kind of at the mercy of what was happening around me. And when I decided that I was just going to operate from sovereignty first, and not like everybody do it my way or there's no way to do it kind of perspective, just to understand that I can have an impact that's very different if I just kind of stay in my own lane in a positive way, if I commit to my style of work and really, imagine that as if it's already happening all the time. Be present in that reality. It's really, really important, I think, to stay there, or for me at least. And I think once I recognized that emotional fragility and I saw what it was causing me to do to myself, and I saw what it was causing me to do in my decision making and being kind of submissive to situations, I found that once I let go of that, I started letting go of things like resentment and identity roles or what I should be and, sources of conflict. And I found myself feeling really empowered and really capable and prepared and able to pivot. And a big part of it for me too, big driving force is I have two daughters. And so, for me, I'm setting the pace for them in a lot of ways as well. I'm helping them live every day with somebody who passionately believes in what they do and lives from that place. And I would love for them to feel as if they have that ability to go out in the world and try things and make some mistakes and not beat themselves up about it. Let themselves kind of fall apart, burn down and rise again. There's definitely a phoenix from the ashes aspect to all of this. And I think the entrepreneur's journey has a lot of that built in. And so it's not for the faint of heart sometimes, but when it's great, it's so great. And when we can operate in that passion and that beauty and really see the significance we're placing in the world and the way people are responding and the impact that's being made and them feeling better, it's so worth it.
Yes, and what a beautiful and I think too rare example to be setting to two young women growing up.
If you enjoy Going Conscious, please subscribe for a new episode every Wednesday. If you think your friends and networks would benefit from listening, please share this podcast of fulfillment and freedom with them. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review. It's great to read what you think, and your support makes a big difference. Together, let's grow our courage and tools to transform and live the lives we really want to. As well as creating Going Conscious, I work as a transformation coach and conscious brand consultant. I'm on a mission to help holistically maximize conscious entrepreneurs to drive positive changes for themselves, others, and the planet. I can help you to transition and level up personally, and I can help your brand grow and make a bigger impact. To connect with me and find out more about how we can work together, find me on Instagram @NikkiTrott or on my website, nikkitrott.com. Please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you, and let's talk about your path of growth and development.
And I'm wondering how you define intuition. What is intuition to you? What is this sense in any way? It doesn't have to be like a concise definition, but I think we all have our own understanding of what our intuition is, which is always shifting throughout our journeys as well. And we'd love to hear any thoughts on what yours is, or how you can describe it, or how you can feel it and know it's there guiding you.
Yeah. So for me, intuition is complex. It's not just this little nagging that tells me to do or not to do something. And I think, really gotten better at my work since I've acknowledged the complexity of intuition and for me, and acknowledged that it's not really necessarily about a moment in time. So to say that better, I think for me, it's a real spirit journey. It's drawing from old energy. It's drawing from ancestral information. It's drawing from what occurs to me that's more channeled and given to me, pretty divinely, in addition to the way I'm thinking or forming things in the world. So if I merge those things, then the excellence of what I can do is whole. When I try to make it, you can't make intuition happen, right? I mean, at least I don't believe we can. So I think it's really more tapping into a bigger power and a bigger sense and an old and ancient energy. And that has a lot of definitions. And for me, it's very ancestral. When I draw from that and then also listen to my own conscious choice, the combination creates this really beautiful, supreme place. But just trying to have kind of that sort of stomach gut reaction isn't always enough. So I do, and it is actually very like restful to lean on that old energy, to know that there are these sort of things that have been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years that are so much bigger than I am, and that information is available to me. That feels very restful. I would also add to that I do a lot of work in my coaching work with the enneagram, and I happen to be an enneagram type that's body based. And so because I'm a body based enneagram type and an action type, it makes sense that, I'm listening to the instinct of my somatic body and and I'm always taking action. So I have to kind of watch myself sometimes because especially with my kids, I'll be, all in action and they aren't necessarily wired the same. So it's worth observing that, that's my driving force and my fire and fuel, but not everybody's.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And the differences and the beauty of them. And I love how you describe intuition. And it really aligns with how I see and feel it too. I also very much believe that it's rooted in ancestral wisdom, universal wisdom, so much bigger than what we can even comprehend. And I don't try to draw circles around that or build a fence around that to have a clear definition. I love that scientists can't explain intuition and don't understand it. And I think it should be left that way, to be something that we feel and that we each experience in our own way. And I believe, of course, it also comes with all of the practical experiences and things that we see and process throughout our lives as well. And this beautiful merging together of all of these different levels of knowledge and knowingness. And that's why when we really tap into it, we can't go wrong. And I think I fully trust mine as well. And as you were talking, I really heard a sense of surrender of the freedom that you can get when you just allow your intuition to guide you without questioning and just really feeling into that knowing. I find it makes my life a lot more simple. I don't have huge debates within myself. I don't have huge, big, difficult decisions to make anymore because I allow my intuition to show me and I allow the path to unfold.
Yeah, I really relate to what you're saying about the unfolding and the listening. And it's come up, I would say for me, that's been a very restful force during this whole journey of the pandemic as well. There have been so many people looking at all the news and all the data and all the science. And I definitely haven't let all that pass me by. I mean, especially from where I began in my work, I've watched it with a lot of curiosity in some ways, but I've also really been trying to listen to, what a variety of different indigenous voices are saying and old stories and legends and what, predictions and just really like listening into and looking at it differently has been, the healing aspect of this time, the healing aspect of slowing down and being quiet and quieting the earth and letting the earth recover from a green and natural perspective. It's just very interesting that sometimes huge forces make you take a beat, and there are a lot of different stories in my journey that have represented that. And some of them very, very difficult. But I think that for me, it's developed a great deal of resilience. And it's offered me this ability to draw from this well of resilience that I always have available. And I think we could use more of that collectively.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. I think that if you are involved in any story, it's so important to pull a really broad breadth of perspectives and not just focus on the mainstream news, which I stopped reading, I guess, 5 years ago now.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. And it really changed my life and helped me to connect with my intuition and follow my path and be based in love, not fear. Yeah. And at first I didn't think I could tell anyone, especially in a professional context, working with all these incredible visionary entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, leaders, and, I don't read the news. But I've since discovered how many incredible, conscious people also don't read the news. And I'm not saying, of course, I'm not saying you're not conscious if you do read the news, but it's amazing actually how many people don't, and how, we're really becoming more and more aware of what we are deciding to let into our body and let into our system. And that's a personal choice. That's something that changes all the time, but just having that awareness makes such a difference.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, it creates a lot of noise. I'm much the same. I stopped reading the news a long time ago as well. And I'll kind of, I've had to look at, I think, tidbits for the sake of, navigating with my kids and things like through that. And my husband works in healthcare. So there have been tidbits that have come through during this last, but this is definitely been an exception. So yeah, I think you're right. It can create a lot of noise, right, around that listening. And just any outside input can create a lot of noise around that listening. And it's difficult because it's still very biased. So yeah, I think it seems like the least biased voice seems to be that ancient ancestral one to me, but that's just my perspective.
Yes, indeed. And regardless of how biased it may be or may not be, what's that compared to? And really, what is there apart from our own truth?
Right.
Of course,
Exactly.
there's information, there's knowledge, and reading and learning and listening to podcasts and intentionally generating the kind of sphere of knowledge around you that you want to absorb and grow and learn with. But it's at the end of the day your own truth that's going to process that and guide you. So yeah, without that, I think there is no truth really.
Right.
However it compares to another's.
Absolutely. And what you just made me think about as you were speaking was the idea that, part of being a purpose-driven entrepreneur or being conscious for me has a lot to do with who I work with, who I choose to spend my time with. So can I help a lot of different people? I believe so, but I, I have to be careful about how their energy affects me at some stage as well, right? And be very mindful about who I'm in relationship with in all ways, in consulting partners, in people that I coach, in people that I collaborate with, or things that I listen to. I think, we're so careful about things like food. And I think in a lot of cases, we're careful about things like exercise, or I think we're getting better and better about being careful about things like skincare, but we aren't very mindful sometimes, I think, collectively about how we let business relationships in. I mean, we definitely are very particular about personal relationships in most cases, but even that feels like it's got some open-endedness, with all the social chatter and everything else. It seems like it can be a little bit too loose a filter. So I'm finding that to be very important as well, like very much catering the relationships I have and catering the people I'm trying to make an impact with and help, and offering my support and also receiving support is very important. I think many of us entrepreneurs are less good at receiving support than in giving it in some cases.
Yes, it's so true. Absolutely. And I love how you bring that up, the importance of being mindful about business relationships. And how do you do that then? What kind of filter do you set?
There are a few, I think. I think for one thing, there has to be some alignment with the type of value system that I'm setting for myself and my work. If we're going to work well together, I think there has to be an equal energy toward making a difference in the dialogue together, especially in a coaching relationship. I don't believe that as a coach I can fix anything or anybody. I can just sort of be more like a Sherpa and walk at their shoulder and help them and, guide them through some things and ask some powerful questions. But it really is only as powerful as the work they want to do. So that's a big part of it. I think I initially thought it was more like working with a certain type of business person. And this was a few years ago, maybe several years ago. And maybe eliminating types of business from my work. But I see it less that way now because some of the people in greatest need and greatest willingness are inside of huge and relatively broken corporations and really deeply need the support, and they're ready. And so I'm finding that work to be actually profound and really positive. But yeah, I think just being really and auditing it all the time, like sometimes I think we get into a relationship, or I've gotten into business relationships, be it a consulting partner or even a coaching client, and looked at it initially through that lens and then let it be for the course of 1 to 2 years or whatever the natural trajectory of the relationship. And I think it's really important to check it all the time and see where, things have changed for each of you, and have they changed in a similar direction or different directions, and what does that mean? And again, for me, it's always pretty obvious because it shows up in my body again. I'll get a bad gut reaction, or I'll feel a heaviness, or I'll feel a weight that just doesn't feel like it fits with what we're doing. And if I notice that, it's always worth sort of contemplating it. And I think also bringing some courageous authenticity to talking about it with people in a soft way, but sort of elevating when there's something going on that feels out of alignment.
Yes. And I love how you just brought it back to the body again. And you mentioned earlier how you are an enneagram type, which relates to the body. And I'm wondering, I'm sure some of our listeners know about the enneagram and some don't. I just discovered enneagram really recently, a few months ago on Clubhouse. And I looked mine up. It's a personality type. So I looked mine up and found I'm an enneagram 8. And a number of the women, I've also interviewed Karen Smith on this podcast, who's also an Enneagram 8 and was in that conversation when I discovered mine. And we've talked about this. So you can also listen to that episode if you want to check it out more. But we talked about just discovering the Enneagram 8, and being an Enneagram 8 woman was so powerful for us, because I certainly felt it enabled me to understand, okay, I have always been this challenger, and I have always found that quite difficult as a woman to have that kind of energy. And I found it so amazing to meet other women with that energy as well. And I didn't know, because I'm so new to it, that some types were rooted in the body and others not. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that if you feel comfortable talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've kind of been looking at Enneagram for several years. Actually, my husband brought it to my attention maybe 3-4 years ago, but I'm now a certified practitioner of Enneagram as well. So if you want to go deeper, you can always let me know.
So you are the right person to ask.
Yeah, I am. And I am also an Enneagram 8. So yes, so therein lies the resonance on some level, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And I did, as soon as you said that, I thought mine must be a body one as well. So, but you carry on.
Yeah. So essentially Enneagram it's in group. There are lots of theories of threes in Enneagram. It's all based on sacred geometry, but there are 9 numbers altogether, and there are clusters of 3. And so there is a cluster of 3 Enneagram types involving 8. That is the action type or the body type. So as an 8, you're naturally a body type. So if we get into, there's more detail there, but there's the clusters of the body type, there's a cluster of heart type, and there's a cluster of thinking types. And so they're all groups of 3, and then we all have what's called a subtype. So there are different energies that come with each of the subtypes as well. So you may be an 8 and I may be an 8, but if we have different subtypes, then we're going to show up actually pretty differently in some ways, and then we'll have kind of that challenger aspect in common. But I think you're right that the 8 energy in women is extremely powerful and very innate and intrinsic in a lot of ways, but it's also one that in many parts of business gets maybe some discrimination. Maybe it gets that, you're a little too much, you're a little too big, and the same energy from a man in some similar environments would not get the same response. So it can be difficult for sure, I think, for Enneagram women to operate in corporate business with peace and grace and feel themselves without feeling diminished. I've definitely walked that journey in many, and that was part of the beginning of the end for me at work in my first career path as well.
Wow, yes, that resonates with me so much. And I've definitely experienced that as well. The sense of being a little bit too much and knowing that if I was not female, then that would not be the perception at all. And really feeling that judgment coming, I felt from both men and women. And that felt quite lonely at times.
Yeah. Definitely. And so the 8s, 9s, and 1s are going to be the body types, and the 2s, 3s, and 4s would be the heart types, and then the 5s, 6s, and 7s are going to be the thinking types or the mind types. And then we all draw from different energies. What I love about Enneagram is it's based in sacred geometry, so it's from the perspective that we're all parts of the whole. So for me, philosophically, it completely aligns. And I do find that when I do work with this particular tool with people that I'm coaching, we get to the bottom of things really, really quickly in terms of forming a foundation of who they are. And we usually work into like talking about their story and where they come from. And, because Enneagram believes that you are this from when you're born. And then you're drawing from the value system of your family and your parents initially, and then your peers and your friends. And then somewhere around your 20s, like maybe for you, if you remember your ultimate 8ness, it might be around like age 20. age 20 to 22. That's kind of when we're at kind of the supreme peak of our behavioral or personality type. I bet you're giggling like I am. Like I can think of some stories from when I'm around 21 that are very fiery.
I was definitely a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But then we all kind of ease into the softness of, the other aspects. And we have kind of these lines and ways we can lean into different energies. Like an 8's going to lead toward 5 and lean toward 2. So 2 is a considerate helper and a supporter, and 5 is very specific and a specialist and very precise with data. So if we're leaning toward the good sides of those lines as 8s, then we have a lot of softness to us. 8s actually turn out to be very soft, but we can also come into conflict without much conflict. Like we can come head to head and kind of have a big conversation without it being disruptive to us, but then to others. So what I'm finding is like, as we get to know these things about ourselves, and then we can explain ourselves and set our boundaries with others and just say, this is me, this is who I am, this is how I show up. And if that's ever something that bothers you or, is in conflict with who you are, then let's talk about that. And like opening those doors is just so, so powerful.
Yes, and I've really experienced that because the 8 is a powerful type, that softness that I definitely have is not always seen. It's not always felt, and people can think that you're completely indestructible and can never be hurt because you have this power. But of course, there is that softness there too, and that sensitivity as well. And I've also experienced what you described of really tapping into the other parts throughout my 20s and 30s so far. And just for our listeners who maybe have no idea about the Enneagram, haven't checked it out yet, don't know theirs, what would you recommend they do to just see online how they can find out their own Enneagram and find out a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great resources to begin reading and looking around. There's a wonderful woman named Beatrice Chestnut who has some panel discussions with like all the different types of 8s and all the different types of 6s and, all the types, but in like a panel group discussion together. And she's also a counselor. So she's got a really balanced, grounded perspective around it. So that's a good place to start if you want to kind of like initially understand and start looking into her. Her books are also really good if you want to initially understand and start looking into it. If people are more interested, I think it's worth starting to get a really good assessment. And there are many that are free, but there are also several that are paid, and some are much better for business than others. And so it's important to, the accuracy of them varies, just like every other psychometric tool. So the one I use tends to be about 96% accurate. And the other closest one I was using prior to that was only about 65% accurate. So the accuracy can vary, and the tool you use can vary. I field a lot of questions on Instagram and through my website about that, and I'm always happy to answer those for people.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Reach out to Courtney. You'll have her details where you can get in touch in the notes. So thank you.
Yeah. It's fascinating and it's complex. I guess the other thing I would say is it's a very complex system. So as people get to know it, like for me, I think it took me about 2 years to wrap my head around it fully. And now it's so natural for me, but it really isn't necessarily completely easy to understand right away in some cases. So just giving yourself some time to sort of read about it is pretty important and kind of study it.
Yeah. Thank you. And Beatrice Chestnut, what a great name.
Right? I know.
Beautiful name.
She has a great podcast as well. So
does she? Okay. Well, look out for it. Thank you very much. Courtney, I would love to ask you, how would you define your purpose and how does it show up in your work?
I believe that, my purpose is to help people really release that emotional fragility I was talking about that I experienced myself and rise to a greater level of what they can be and that kind of passionate sovereignty that's like far beyond what they think that they can accomplish. I think empowering people to feel that they have that ability to step so much further than they think they can, and to do it. it's not going to uncomplicate the situation, but it's definitely going to make them more capable of handling the situation if they can embrace that power. So I think, me finding that power myself via all my different ways of learning and ways of experiencing the world, and tapping into that bigger, more ancient energy, and then helping others feel empowered to also seize that is the thing of primary importance to me.
Beautiful. Yes. Really empowering others and taking them on a journey that you have experienced yourself and risen through yourself.
Yeah, and just letting them feel like they have choice, they have power. They can always change the situation, that they are never a victim to their circumstances. They always have the ability, regardless of how difficult the situation, to be in choice and to change what's in front of them. The trajectory can always be different. And I know very well from personal experience how scary and stressful and energy depleting that can be. But once you do that once, I think it gets easier and easier. You probably feel this way too with, your different paths of journey through your work. I'm sure you saw the momentum pick up and it get simpler to pivot and change and modify and refine. And it's exciting, it's fun. It's living a life full of joy and ease, and a life that feels like you're doing what you're meant to be doing. And that could be someone working in a corporation. That could be someone owning a startup. That could be someone, doing something that's really life's work based. I think there's a lot of different versions of that for different people, but just feeling that sense of joy and ease and actually enjoying every day at work. We spend a lot of time working. So I really believe strongly that we need to enjoy it, and we need to feel the fullness of that.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Me too. And you're right. I think that change is muscle. And I found it easier and easier and easier. But I have to say, I'm one of those freaks who loves change. I just love it. So
Yeah.
I know that's
I'm the same. It might be an 8
typical.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. So as we come to the end of our conversation, I'd love to hear, what does personal success mean to you? And maybe how has this changed, if it has changed, across your journey?
Yeah. Personal success in the beginning, I think, was achievement. It was a little bit of a status symbol. It was, what technical skill could I achieve, and what level of leadership could I achieve, and what title could I get? And, there's a layer of that that's come into my entrepreneurial journey as well, I think. But I think personal success now is just kind of having enough work to keep my family in balance from, an economic or financial perspective, and being able to truly see people change and see them feel better and live better and be better. And, for that to be really the exclamation point on what they're doing, it really drives my personal success. The more that I have conversations with people where they say, quickly, this work is working for me, I feel different, I see things differently, that's success for me, because that means that it's not me driving that for them, but it's me setting an example. It's me setting the pace. It's me using all of my experiences, good, bad, and ugly, to help. And it's me, sort of protecting and empowering people. And as I've figured out about myself, that's really what drives me. So that's much more important to me than some kind of achievement. But it's a nice place to be as well, because I'm not chasing the rat race. I'm not following anybody else's marker or indicator. As long as I've, filled up my schedule to the degree that the action side of me feels is successful. And then I have lots of room for creativity as well. I think success looks like the balance of that and having room to be creative, room to be a creator and do things that make me feel happy and passionate and energize me individually as well.
What a gorgeous description of success. Thank you. And is there a key takeaway or message from our conversation today that you'd like to share?
I guess I just encourage people to feel hopeful, that it's, even if things look pretty dark or scary, or they're not sure which way to go, I think there's a lot of resource out there through things like your podcast and things like these kind of conversations that can really help them with really no economic stamp, and that, the will to do so, the will to listen, the will to let kind of the bigger forces help guide you, and the will to make things be different and make change and make that change good for you is totally worth it. But it's always available. So I think, when we feel really dark, asking for help is super important, and getting that support somewhere. And, even if it's a scary moment to ask for help or support, that may be the most critical time to do it. And, just to lean in and listen and really take a chance on yourself and know that you can let go of that part that feels delicate and step into something much bigger and more powerful than that.
Take a chance on yourself.
Exactly.
Is there a book that you've read recently and loved that you can recommend to us?
I have a recent one and an old one. So the old one is pretty obscure, but I've just found it on Amazon recently, which is great because it was out of print for a while. And it's called Griffin and Sabine. And it's this beautiful illustrated book that's like this series of letters between two people. It's written by a gentleman named Nick Bantock, and it's all illustrated and gorgeous, and it has these letters that you pull out and read, and it's just beautiful and an experience. So that one I've loved since the 1990s. I mean, it's not new. And there's a whole series he's written, a lot of different books. And then more recently, I've just gotten into Jamie Wheel's new book called Recapture the Rapture. And it's intense. It's a lot. It's really interesting. And it's really one of the, I think, stories that kind of crosses personal and business and really dives deep into consciousness, and is it's I think going to be a marker. It's going to be a totem and a touchstone for the next few years for a lot of people.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And that sounds really interesting, both of them. And lastly, where's the best place for our listeners to find you online and get in touch?
Yeah, I would say the easiest thing to do is find me on my website or LinkedIn. Those are good places where I'll always respond to a message. I also work to respond to all my messages on Instagram as much as I can, but that gets a little buried. So the easiest way is to probably reach me through my website, which is just my name, CourtneyFeider.com. And yeah, I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn as well and offer recommendations around Enneagram or books or resources. I actually really like offering suggestions of resources, so I'm very happy to do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Courtney. It's been wonderful having you today.
Oh, it's been so much fun, Nikki. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with the wonderful Courtney. I love how she talks about how you can often see only the threads between the different things you've done and been interested in with hindsight. When we describe our journeys to our purpose, it can sometimes seem that we always knew what we were doing, when in actual fact there were many moments of complete confusion and surrendering to an unknown and unseeable plan along the way. If you're interested in our discussion about the enneagram, do look it up and find out yours, or take Courtney up on her offer to help guide you. I'm sure many of you will find this to be a fantastic tool. And if you're already using it, I'd love to hear how. Do leave us a comment on the episode post on my Instagram page. Courtney talked about the power of her intuition and how important it is for her in finding her way along her own path. This theme is coming up again and again recently on Going Conscious, which only goes to show us how very important it is. Helping people to connect with their intuition for clarity and guidance in all areas of life, including business, is a core part of the work that I do. So I'm going to create a free resource for you on this soon. Look out for it on Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe now. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and short review. If you think people you know might benefit from listening to Going Conscious, please share it with them. I know I get much of my inspiration from podcasts which are shared with me. For all episodes, our library and more, visit goingconscious.com. Your support to spread this positive message of fulfillment and freedom means so much. As well as hosting Going Conscious, I help conscious entrepreneurs to transition and unleash their power and purpose with my transformation coaching and conscious brand consulting work. Discover more on Instagram at Nikki Trott or on my website, nikkitrott.com. I'd love to hear from you and to talk about your goals, questions, or how we can work together. And if I don't hear from you before then, see you next Wednesday on the next episode of Going Conscious. As always, live your freedom.